Hey, this is James, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I work with clarifying cards. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this viewer-requested video. This video is a follow-up to my 2 option spreads video, and that was also a viewer-requested video. So a little bit of a setup as to how we got from there to here. So that video was a request by one of my viewers, Tisempa Mon Ami, who asked me if I would be willing to demonstrate a reading that I use for when a person is faced with a couple of options in regard to a situation. And so after watching that video, Tisempa circled back around and had a couple of questions for 2 of the cards that showed up, one in the tarot reading that was in that video and another for the Lenormand card that was in that video, because in that video I did a reading using tarot and one using Lenormand. So Tisempa asked me if I would be willing to demonstrate how I clarify cards where there's a question around. So this is a video where I'm going to be demonstrating how I work with clarifying cards. And so I'm going to be revisiting those 2 particular readings because those were the readings that were in question, or at least the cards in those readings that were in question. So I'm going to be using those again, and I'm just going to be building on those. So again, if you haven't checked out that former video and you'd like to, it may help make watching this video a little easier. So again, that information will be in the description box below. So now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and revisit the first of those 2 readings. And here we are with the first of the 2 readings that I did in the previous video, the 2 option spread. And this was a tarot reading that I did for Tisempa, who asked me if I would use a scenario that involved a gentleman named Paul. And in this particular scenario, Paul is in a relationship with Maria. And he was considering the option of either staying in the relationship or exiting the relationship. So in that reading, this column that has the 7 of Swords, the Lovers, and Justice, and I'll be talking about this column specifically in this segment, talked about Paul's choice for staying in the relationship and how that possibly could play out. The card in question for Tisempa was the 7 of Swords. Now in that reading, I talked about the 7 of Swords relating to this idea about doing the unexpected. That's one of my meanings for the card. So if Paul was going to choose this particular path or this particular option, meaning staying in the relationship, and which was very significant because the Lover's card is on this side, then he would have to be willing to do something differently, meaning doing something unexpected, right? Maybe something that Maria wouldn't anticipate or wouldn't expect him to do, right? So Tisempa wanted some more clarity around this card and asked me, once I posted the video and he watched it, asked me how would you go about clarifying that particular card. So I'm going to show you right now one of 2 ways that I explained to Tisempa about how to clarify a particular card. So this for me would be the 1 card method, meaning like you would just pull 1 card to clarify, right? So because I am revisiting this reading, I'm going to shuffle the cards. Normally, if I was with a client and we would be in the moment and the need for clarification of a card would come up, then I would just draw right from the top of the deck. But like I said, because the cards had been picked up and put away, I'm going to shuffle that question into the cards. So we're asking, what additional information do we need to know about the 7 of Swords with respect to doing the unexpected? Like, what more does Paul need to know about that? All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck because this is not a situation that involves me. And because I pulled the cards right off the top of the deck when I did the reading in the previous video, I'm sticking with that. So the top card is going to be the clarification card. And here we have, ooh, okay. So now, here we have the Wheel of Fortune. So now my first impulse is to go with the idea that the Wheel of Fortune is just like the Lovers and Justice in this column. It is a major arcana card. So now we have a significant turning point, or a major turning point, because this is my meaning for the card. Whenever the Wheel of Fortune comes up, it represents, you know, something where there's an opportunity for things to change for the better, right? So now, in light of the dynamics of the situation with Paul and Maria, this card would suggest that there has to be some kind of change, right? So if the Seven of Swords is about doing the unexpected here, then this would be about ending a particular cycle or pattern that's at work in the relationship, right? For me, the Wheel of Fortune helps us become aware of cycles or patterns at work, right? So Paul would have to do something to change the repetitive cycles or patterns in how he engages with Maria in their relationship, right? So Paul would have to consider what it is that's at work in the relationship that makes him want to exit it, right? And if we go with the illustration on the Seven of Swords, it looks like there's a man who's picking up his swords and walking away from something established, right? If that's the case, why? Why does Paul want to consider the option of leaving the relationship, right? Because there may be some cycles or patterns at work that are no longer serving him or supporting him or even supporting Maria in the relationship, right? And so for him, he has to be willing to identify what those cycles and patterns are, right? Because the challenging side of the Wheel of Fortune, it could be like you are in a hamster wheel and you're running, and you're not getting anywhere, right? So the biggest thing here is that the Wheel of Fortune is saying, if Paul was to choose to do something differently, meaning doing something unexpected, it would be with the idea about changing a particular cycle or pattern in the relationship, right? Now, another thing with the Wheel of Fortune is that this can represent growth, evolution, and expansion, right? So another card that would suggest on some level, if he was to commit to sticking with the relationship with Maria, it could grow, right? He has to be willing to take a chance, right? For me, this is about, taking a chance on something, right? It could suggest too, like, don't be so quick to leave a relationship. You just may be going through a down cycle, but it's just a cycle, right? Just as we have down cycles, it could turn to an up cycle, right? Things could turn around and turn around for the better. So this card would just be suggesting to Paul is that it's just a cycle. It's a cycle that you could work through, right? But again, it's making me feel like the bigger thing here is that there may be a repetitive cycle or a repetitive pattern that Paul is not seeing. And he may think it's easier for him to walk away from the relationship. But it's making me feel like on some level it's more important for him to stick with it and try to identify what the cycle or the pattern is, and especially his role or part in that. Because if he's not careful, he could repeat that in another relationship, right? The fact that he has three major arcana cards on this side suggests that there's bigger things at work in this relationship with Maria that he needs to see, right? And it could be, as I'm looking at that, one of the cycles or the patterns could be his level of commitment. If we go with the Lover's card being the central issue here, then this could be about commitment, right? And it's making me feel like, is Paul one of those people where when the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? Meaning like when things get hard, he kind of exits things, right? And so for him, it's a matter of commitment, right? But for me, the biggest thing here when it's about doing the unexpected, it's about taking a look Now, swords being about the interior, this is about ideas, information, communication, but ways of thinking. Right, and so I think it's an opportunity for him to become more aware of thought patterns that create repetitive cycles and patterns for him and how he shows up in a relationship. So that is one way I would look at clarifying this card. For me, it's like if he does something differently, does something unexpected, then it sets the stage for a great process of change, a major turning point, right? To turn things around and change things for the better. But again, it also makes me think, like, take a look at something much larger that's going on and how Paul contributes to that. All right, so that, like I said, that is one way of clarifying. So now I'm going to present the second way that you could clarify a card. All right, so I put the Wheel of Fortune card from our previous segment back into the deck, and now I'm going to present another way that I use cards, the remainder of the deck, to clarify a card in question in a reading. So again, we're sticking with the Seven of Swords because that was the card in question for Tsempa. So again, I'm going to take the deck in hand, and this time I'm going to draw 3 cards, because the other way that I suggested, besides pulling a 1 card off the top of the deck, would be to separate the card or remove the card in question and do another reading around that. So one of the ways that I do that is I usually draw 3 cards. So I'm not going to remove the card from the overall reading, but I will take a moment to shuffle the cards with the idea that we're asking the same question as we did in the previous segment. What more do we need to know about what the Seven of Swords is trying to convey? And I'm shuffling that question into the cards. Like, what additional information do we need to know about the Seven of Swords? And specifically, I would probably add the doing the unexpected, because there's something that was conveyed about the card that produced, like, what do we need to know more about, right? So I'm going to go maybe the doing the unexpected part. All right, so this is going to be the last time I shuffle. All right. So again, you could cut the cards. I usually like to cut the cards. And again, because this is not about me, I'm going to cut the cards away from me. So at this point, there are a number of ways that you could pull clarifying cards. You know, you could fan them out. You could take them right off the top of the deck. I think just for something different, I'm going to pull a card off each one of the piles. So I'll pull this one off the top, this one off the top, and then this one off the top. And then we'll put them back together and remove that. So now we have the 3 cards. I pulled them in this order. This was the first one. So now, if we're asking what more do we need to know about this card? So what additional information does it have to say? First card, okay. So here we have the 2 of Swords. So the first thing to notice is that we have the suit of Swords repeating again. So swords can represent things having to do with problems, troubles, challenges. It could be about information, communication. For me, swords represent lifestyle, choices and changes, things of that nature. So this fits the context because here Paul is faced with, you know, a potential choice or decision that could potentially lead to a lifestyle change, right? Now, interesting to note the card. So the 2 of Swords, when it comes up in a relationship reading, can represent conflict, right? So there is some sort of conflict between him and Maria. It could also represent internalized conflict, like the 2 options themselves, right? Because this is the 2 option spread. And notice that we have a figure sitting on a bench with her arms crossed, and there's a sword in each hand, right? So this could just represent conflicting ideas, you know, a state of indecision, not being sure, that kind of thing, right? So now, if we're talking about this idea about what more do we need to know about doing the unexpected, one of the things here could be is like, what would Paul be willing to do to help resolve the conflict or the disagreement or the stalemate even, if you will, between him and Maria? Right? And so it could just be a matter of, how does Paul normally approach conflict with Maria? Does he, going back to temperance being in the middle of the reading, is he willing to compromise, or does he butt heads with Maria? In this particular case, this card can be about butting heads. So doing the unexpected would suggest that one of the things he could do is just be willing to agree to disagree, right? It could be a matter of not trying to get Maria to always see his point, right? Or vice versa. Could it just be a matter of, if there is a disagreement or they have some sort of disagreement, could it just be a matter that each one just says, you know what, I don't see things the way you do, and we're just going to have to leave it like that, right? So it fits two things. Number one, it fits the context of the situation, the conflict, and the internal conflict that he is faced with, needing to make a choice. And it could just be a matter of, I'm not sure what I want to do, right? But I would say, how does he choose to resolve conflicts with Maria? Does he continue to butt heads with her? Or is he willing to start saying, maybe we just need to agree to disagree? So that is the Two of Swords. Next card. And so here we have the Nine of Wands. So now the Nine of Wands is all about standing your ground, being on guard, that kind of thing. So this could be about being on defense. So if we go with the idea that the cards are telling a story, so the Two of Swords is all about conflict, remember, right? How do we deal with disagreements? Especially in our relationships, right? Especially when somebody may be expressing a viewpoint or an idea that's different from our own, right? So now this card would suggest on some level that we get our guard up, right? We go on defense, right? That's the way we operate. We get defensive about our position, right? And so if we go back to the whole idea about pulling the clarifying cards, is what does Paul need to know about doing the unexpected? Could be about, like, do you always need to have your guard up? Do you always need to be on defense when it comes to a disagreement, right? And if so, why? This card, for me, when we talk about the idea about defense mechanisms at work, we need to defend ourselves because on some level we don't want to be hurt, right? This is a form of protection. So it could just be a matter of, I'm going back to the Two of Swords for a moment. The Two of Swords can also be about what we deny and what our blind spots are, right? So for Paul, it could be a blind spot he has, is that he goes on defense, and it's because on some level he has created walls around himself to kind of protect himself, right? It could be a matter of he does things because he doesn't want to be hurt. And so sometimes this card could suggest giving off the kind of vibe or energy about, like, don't mess with me kind of energy, right? But it could just be a matter of, being on guard, with the idea, like, I need to protect myself, I need to keep myself safe, that kind of thing. And so it's a matter of, would you be willing to maybe change your position on something? This card would be about, like, lowering your walls, like, start bringing the walls down. And as I'm doing that, now, another thing that comes to me is that sometimes I hear a song with this card. So, actually two. So the first song that I usually hear with this song is by Destiny's Child called Survivor. So when I'm hearing that in my head, it's a reminder for the person, because this card can be about strength and its inner strength, right? So surviving situations, right? So this card would suggest, like, if there is maybe some sort of conflict that he's having with Maria now, that's kind of getting him to start thinking about whether or not he wants to stay or go, with regard to the relationship, then this card is saying, Paul, you've survived conflicts with Maria before, right? It would make me feel on some level they've gone through maybe lots of challenges together and they've survived or weathered them all. So this card is asking him to keep that in mind, especially with the idea that the figure on the Nine of Wands is looking at the figure on the Two of Swords, right? So it's making me feel like on some level, like just understand that you're a survivor. So if that's the case, then you could survive this too, right? And the other song that I hear with this card is by Elton John, I'm Still Standing. It's kind of a similar thing. It's about taking note of all the situations that you've gone through and that you're still standing, right? You've survived them or you've weathered them all, right? Now the other thing here could be a matter of if there is some sort of internalized conflict with the Two of Swords, the Nine of Wands, the figure has his head bandaged up. So it could just be a matter of giving a situation a lot of thought and maybe even overthinking it to the point where he's giving himself a headache, and that would be more in the metaphorical sense. Right? So that's how I would look at that. So for me, my first impulse would be to think about the ways in which Paul may be showing up with his guard up or his, being on defense when they're having a disagreement. And one of the things could be like, why are you choosing that position, right? But again, it's making me feel like, would it be worth your while to just agree to disagree? And then the last card. Yeah, here we have the Six of Cups. So now this, for me, can show up in a relationship that's long-term. Like we've been together for a long time kind of thing, right? But it could also about being willing to make some kind of arrangements because of all the floral arrangements on the card, right? And so now here's the thing. If there is this idea about being a survivor, right, then this card would be following that up, saying, like, you've weathered a lot of things from the past, because the Six of Cups is about nostalgia, it's about memories, it's about the past, right? So it's saying to him, you've had disagreements in the past before, and you've gotten through them, right? What's different about this one now? Right? If there is some sort of disagreement about the past that's playing a part in this state of things as they are now, how can you make arrangements to work through it? Now, it could also be, too, I'm looking at the card, and I'll hold it up again. I'm looking at the Six of Cups again, and I'm noticing that the young man on the card is giving flowers to a young woman on the card, right? So for me, this could be, a gesture that's being repeated, and that would be because of all the other similar floral arrangements in the card, right? So it's making me feel like, is there someone in the relationship who keeps making overtures or making gestures again and again? And then here we have the girl on the card, or the girl figure, wearing gloves or mitts, right? So is the other person receptive to the repeated overtures and gestures being made, right? It could be one person in the relationship is doing the initiating. If there is a thing about conflict, and maybe this is about how we resolve conflict, maybe one person is continually the person making overtures or initiating the reconciliation process, right? And so maybe if we're talking about the Seven of Swords is about doing the unexpected, would it be worth Paul's effort? Like if it's not him who's continually making the overtures, would he be willing to initiate something? And as I'm saying that, maybe if things are going to change with Maria in a significant way, would he be willing to initiate that process of change? Maybe he's the one who's standing and waiting for Maria to come around. Maybe come around to his way of thinking. And maybe the card is saying, would you be willing to maybe change that dynamic? Right? Now, it could also be that there's a past issue that Paul needs to recover from, and he has to choose to do that. And he's not sure if he's able to do that. right? Because again, the Six of Cups can represent something from the past. So maybe is there something from the past that Maria has done that he has not gotten over? And that brings us back to what I talked about in the previous video about the Seven of Swords, talking about this idea about maybe trust being broken and how do we reestablish that. These cards would be a natural follow-up. He's hurt, he has his walls up, and his back is to, the figure's back is to the past, right? So something about the past that needs to be addressed, right? And so the question for Paul would be, are you willing to remain living in the past, being stuck in the past, holding on to a memory, or are you willing to take the process of moving through that and resolving that conflict? Because his back is to this card and facing this card. I'm talking about the figure on the card. And in the moment, Paul might say, I'm not sure if I want to do that. But clearly with the Two of Swords, there is some sort of conflict that needs to be resolved. And the only way it's going to be resolved is if Paul makes the choice, along with Maria. It has to be a dual thing, but if Paul makes the choice to resolve that conflict. Yeah, and as I'm looking at the card, the Two of Swords, there's water in the background. So there's emotional backdrop to it, right? Because water symbolically represents emotions and feelings, right? And there's also a moon in the card. The moon represents our emotional nature and emotional aspect. Right? So clearly the cards are talking about something in the past that has affected Paul on an emotional level, and he's not sure. He's put up walls to kind of protect himself from being hurt again like that, but maybe hasn't actively worked through the process of resolving that conflict. And so that would be the doing the unexpected. Would he be willing to put time and energy into resolving that conflict? Is the relationship significant enough and worth it? And that would be, again, going back to what I talked about here with the Lover's card about the angel being Raphael, and I had talked about healing needing to take place, and healing is a commitment that both parties would need to kind of agree to. So that is how I would clarify the Seven of Swords using more than one card. So now let's move on to the next segment where we'll take a look at the Lenormand reading that was in that video and how do we do clarifying cards around a card in question in that reading. And here we are with the two options spread that I did in the previous video. And I will be touching on aspects of it briefly. If you want to see it in depth, you can refer to the previous video. So again, the situation involved a man named Paul. And Paul is going through a situation where he's in business and he's not seeing a whole lot of growth in his business. So one of the options Paul was considering was looking for something else to do altogether outside of the business. And the other option was to put time, energy, and resources into advertising his business, meaning promote it more. So the central card here, Mice, was talking about the gradual decline in Paul's business and the stress and the worry that resulted in that. The column on the left was talking about the option of looking for something else to do altogether. So here we had garden, moon, and ring. And then on the other side, about advertising or promoting the business more, we had key, flowers or bouquet, and mountain. So when I talked about this reading on this side, mountain being the last card, talked about a challenge or a setback or some kind of obstacle. For me, it would be, even though the key was a very positive card, because for me it's a yes card and something that is important or certain, here we had maybe some sort of delay or setback with that. And so when I posted the video, Tisempa asked me about clarifying the mountain card. How would I go about doing that? So in this particular segment, I'm going to demonstrate how I would use Lenormand to clarify a particular card. So what we could do is we set an intention, because Lenormand is very specific, right? Or at least my experience with it is that it's very specific. So you have to be really clear and specific on the question that you are posing to the cards if you want a clear answer. So if the confusion or the uncertainty is around the mountain card, and we're wanting to know more about that, the question I would frame would be, what more do we need to know or do about the challenge, the setback, or the delay being posed by the mountain card, right? So that is the question I'm holding in my mind. Then I have the rest of the deck here. I'm going to take that question and shuffle the cards on that. So again, we're asking the cards to give us more information about this challenge, this setback, this delay. Either what do we need to know about it, or what can we do to move through it? Because mountain is also about overcoming those challenges, right? So I'm shuffling that into the cards. So now at this point I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. And because the question is not about me, I cut away from me. And then I put the cards together. And at this point, because I just dealt from the top of the deck in the previous video, I'm just going to do the same thing here. So what I would do is I would lay 3 cards over mountain, because mountain is the card that we are trying to clarify, right? So, and since Lenormand is best read in combination to other cards, I figured at the minimum, you could do 2 probably at the minimum, but I like 3, right? So those are the cards. So now let's take a look at the line that is wanting to elaborate more on the mountain card. So here, first card we have Fox. Okay, so Fox is a card about job and employment, right? Here we have Sun, best card in the deck, so that's good. And I love the fact that Sun is also showing up in the same column as Key, because Key is also a yes card. So these are both yes cards for me. So now remember, the question was ultimately about the choices, about either looking for something else altogether or sticking with the business, but in terms of promoting it or advertising it more, right? And then the last card, okay. And here we have, as the last card, we have Whip. So we have Fox, we have Sun, and we have Whip. So now remember, the cards are answering the question, what do we need to know more about the challenge or the setback or the delay, right? So the challenge here has to do with skill. Remember now, if this is about promoting the business or advertising it more, then this is a matter of Fox. For me, it represents job and employment, and it represents self-employment, so it fits the context. But in this particular case, it's about skill, right? So for me, this is about skill, craft, and perfecting that, right? So if this is about promoting and advertising, then this could just be a matter of that. It's a challenge because Paul might not have the skill, or doesn't believe he has the skill in order to promote or advertise his business, right? If that's the case, then this card is also about having a strategy, right? So the delay could be because there's no strategy or there's no plan, right? Plan for what? Success, right? The Sun card is all about confidence. It's all about success. So here, another thing, if we go with the idea that I talked about in the previous video, that mountain can also represent being your own worst enemy, then here we have maybe a lack of confidence, and that in that regard, then this could be about changing one's outlook, because this card can represent positive outlook or positive energy. But if we go with the idea that this is talking about a strategy or a plan for success, or a plan or a strategy that is successful. Right, so there is that to consider with these 2 cards. And then Whip following that. Now, Whip could be a challenging card. So the first thing you could look at and go, ooh, well, you got Fox and you got Whip. Those are 2 challenging cards. But again, everything is all about context, right? So here we have, what's the delay? What's part of the setback here? It's, again, this could be training. Now remember, if this is about skill, then it could be a skill that becomes trained, like you get it through training. But it could also be discipline, right? If we go back to the idea that the mountain can represent being one's own worst enemy, then this could just be a matter of disciplining oneself, right? Because for me, in a positive sense, this could be about training, and this could be about discipline, right? So it could just be a matter of if Paul is going to advertise or promote his business, he needs to be disciplined about it, right? If we go with the idea that we're reading the Sun as success and pairing this card, success through discipline, success through training, right? Now, this card is also about repetition, right? So it could just be a matter of he has to understand that advertising is just not a one and done, meaning like you don't just do it once and then think that your business is going to turn around. It's a repetitive process, right? You have to do it again and again and again. So he has to be clear on that. If the Sun is the focus card, then this is about focusing on illumination, enlightenment, right? If we're focusing on success, if this is the focus, success through what? Through a job that we have to do again and again. Right? In a positive sense, whip can represent sorting something out and working something out. So if Paul wants to be successful with the advertising, if he wants to get over the hump, over the mountain, it's going to take discipline to do it. Right? The fox is, again, this is about job, employment, self-employment. This is great. And it would be about, like, you know, if he's lacking the skill, if he's not feeling confident about the skill of advertising and promoting, then he either needs to train himself to learn it. This would be about a skill through training, or that he just needs to just be disciplined enough to do it and do it more than once. Advertising, especially when you're self-employed, is not something that you do just once and think it's going to turn your whole thing around. But I love seeing the Sun card because the Sun card is the best card and it can outshine negative cards around it, right? So it's so bright that it's shining its light and maybe reducing the negativity of these two cards, which is why I'm tending to look at them more in a positive light, Sun, than in a negative one. So that is how I would add clarification, Sun, to the Mountain card. And on that note, I'm going to round out and end this video here. So this has been James Himm Mitchell, clarifying some elements of the two options readings that I did in the previous video. So to Sempa, because you were the one who requested this, I hope you found this helpful and informative in terms of how I personally work with clarifying cards. And if you're not to Sempa and you watch this, I hope you also found my process of working with clarifying cards helpful in your own personal practice with your cards. So again, this is James Himm Mitchell, rounding out this video. Thank you so much for sharing space here with me for this video, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video together. So until then, take care and have a wonderful day.